Welcome to the basement again. We're talking about another sentence from Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath. I'll get out of the way, per usual, and we'll talk about it. In certain critical parts of the brain, those that deal with reading and processing words, dyslexics have less gray matter. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a couple things in particular. First, these funky pieces of punctuation floating around in the middle of the sentence, those are called dashes. And then I also want to talk about objects, okay? We know that verbs can have objects, we know prepositions can have objects, and they're getting a little bit complicated in this sentence. First, dashes. What's going on with these dashes? Well, basically dashes mean that you can remove whatever is inside of them, okay? So if we read the sentence again, in certain critical parts of the brain, dyslexics have less gray matter. So if we eliminate everything here in the middle, that sentence still makes sense even without these words right here inside the dashes. So you can use dashes as sort of like, you can think of them as a super comma maybe. It's a way of setting off information that is not necessary for the sentence to make sense. It gives you helpful information, but that information is not necessary. So that's what dashes are used for. Please don't confuse dashes for their cousin, the hyphen. There are red-blooded animals, red-blooded. That's a hyphen, not a dash. Okay, hyphens are used in between two words to make two-word adjectives. Dashes are used to set off non-essential information. Okay, dashes are out of the way. Now let's talk about objects. First, let's hit our verb objects. So if we identify the subject of our independent clause, if we eliminate everything else, all we really need for the sentence to make sense is this piece right here. Dyslexics have less gray matter. Subject is what? Dyslexics. What's the verb? They have. What do they have? Matter or gray matter, and in fact they have less gray matter. So you can think of gray as an adjective, less as an adjective, describing matter. So this is our independent clause. So verbs can have subjects, they always have subjects, and they can often have objects. Here in this case, matter is the object of the verb have. Okay, that's piece one of the puzzle. Piece two of the puzzle, we've talked about this before as well, is that prepositions have objects as well. We have a couple prepositional phrases before we get to the dash. In certain critical parts of the brain, well, we have a prepositional phrase here. In certain critical parts. In parts, preposition, noun, object of the preposition, adjectives describing the noun. Okay? One prepositional phrase. Second prepositional phrase, of the brain. Of preposition, brain, noun, object of the preposition, with the article the describing it. Okay, so verbs have objects, prepositions have objects. Sometimes you run into things that look like verbs, but they don't act like verbs. Okay, and that's something that's happening inside the dashes here. Let me explain. So if we look at what's happening inside the dashes, those that deal with reading and processing words, you might think that reading and processing are acting as verbs, but really they're not. And here's a little tip for you. Whenever you see an ing word that looks like a verb, it's oftentimes not acting like a verb. For it to be acting like a verb, it has to have a little helper in front of it. So I could say, I am reading words. Okay? And in that case, am reading is a verb phrase, and it's actually acting as a verb. Okay? This is our main verb, this is our helping verb. ing words only function as verbs if they have these little helpers. Okay? If I said, the student reading her textbook fell asleep, then reading her textbook is an adjective phrase. It's describing the student. Okay? So reading her textbook is not actually a verb. It's an ing acting as an adjective because it doesn't have that helping verb in front of it. Okay? And that's what we have here. But these are not acting as adjectives. It gets even trickier. So ing words can function as verbs, they can function as adjectives, or they can function as nouns. Okay? So if we look inside the dashes, we recognize this word with. That's a preposition, right? And now what's the object of that preposition? Well, we see words, and we know that words is a noun, so you might be tempted to think that words is the object of the preposition with, but that's actually not really the case. Our real objects here are reading and processing. Okay? Now we know that nouns are people, places, and things, right? Student, person, place, Iowa, thing, bicycle. But nouns can also be ideas, like liberty, education, freedom, and they can be activities. And these are activity nouns, reading and processing. Activity nouns will end in ing. Because they're called verbals, which makes it even trickier. They're not verbs, but they're called verbals when they're acting as a noun or an adjective. They sort of take on objects, okay? So they deal with what? With processing, but specifically processing words, okay? So I would say that this whole piece right here is the object of my preposition, okay? So that's kind of funky. You can almost think of this as the object of the verbal, and so those two words are acting as the object of the preposition. It's a little goofy, I know. Such is life, such is the English language. So that's part one, but we actually have a preposition with two objects, and so we have reading as well. It's another activity noun. That might make sense. I could say I went to the movies with Tony and Sarah. Okay, there we have a preposition with, and it has two objects, Tony and Sarah. Here, reading and processing words are objects, but actually we kind of have an implied part over here, because reading and processing are both sharing this word, words, right? I can say, I poured and drank a cup of coffee. What I'm really saying, what you understand me to say is, I poured a cup of coffee and drank a cup of coffee. But instead of saying of coffee each time, we just sort of let the pour share the of coffee that comes with the drinking, right? So this could actually read those that deal with reading words and processing words. So because we want to, use as few words as possible, we don't actually include that in the sentence. But we can think of it as sort of borrowing this word, words, over here. I feel like I've said words 2,000 times in this video. Words, words, words. So we have three prepositional phrases in certain critical parts. Preposition object, of the brain, preposition object. And then we have another one, with what? Reading words and processing words. Okay? So couple complicated things going on there with verbals and prepositional phrases.